Today, Dr. Josette Lewis will be in conversation with our Executive Director, Dr. Saharah Chapotin, to discuss the plant science behind growing almonds. Dr. Josette Lewis is the Chief Science Officer for the Almond Board of California. She has over 25 years of experience in agriculture spanning the public and private sectors, from research to policy to business development. Dr. Saharah Chapotin is the Executive Director of the US Botanic Garden. She is a plant scientist with a passion to educate people about the importance of plants and agriculture. Welcome, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Chapotin.
Thank you, Grace, and good afternoon, everybody. Josette, hello. It's so wonderful to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
I'll just share by way of introduction. Josette and I worked together many, many years ago at the U.S. Agency for International Development, where Josette was the Director of Agriculture and managed a very large agricultural research portfolio aimed at addressing global food security. So it's wonderful to see you again, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about almonds. And so to kick it off, tell us what you find fascinating about almonds.
Well, I grew up here in California, so I grew up actually in a farming part of the state and familiar to see almonds. And we, in fact, ate a lot of almonds that we collected off the sides of the roads when I was growing up. But one of the things I learned when starting to work for the Almond Board is that a typical almond orchard is actually composed of at least 2 different varieties, and sometimes even 3 different varieties of almonds. So the trees with slightly different genetics. And the reason for that is that almonds evolved to have a genetic barrier to self-pollination. So they can't pollinate themselves. It's almost like blood types where you can't donate blood from one type to the next. But it's really nature's way of making sure that almonds can't marry their cousin. So it's an evolutionary strategy to encourage diversity. And as a result, an almond orchard has to have at least 2 varieties in order to get that cross-pollination and compatibility. And what that means is that the almond tree also evolved in the same parts of the world as honeybees. So almonds evolved to need honeybees for that cross-pollination function. So as part of my job, not only do I get to learn a lot and help advance the plant science and agriculture of growing almonds, but I also get to learn a lot about honeybees and pollinators more broadly. A lot of my work is working with beekeepers to make sure that we keep those bees safe and effective at pollinating our trees, and increasingly also looking at the role of orchards as a habitat that can support native pollinators as well.
That's fascinating. Tell us a little bit more about what do the bees get out of pollinating almonds?
Yeah. Well, really, I like to think it's almost like a partnership that was truly designed by nature. So almond trees have to rely on bees to pollinate the tree, even in the wild. And in return, the almond tree provides really high quality and abundant nutrition for honeybees. If someone were to come to the Botanic Gardens in early spring before the cherry blossoms, you will see that almond tree in blossom. It's one of the very first things to bloom on the landscape here in California, but also in the native areas of the Middle East where it arose. So it really rewards the honeybee very early in the year with abundant pollen, which is sort of like a protein source. It provides many of the essential amino acids that honeybees need for nutrition. There's a compound called amygdalin, which people might be familiar with, sort of amaretto flavor of not necessarily the snacking almonds, but the liqueur or almond paste, marzipan. That flavor comes from amygdalin, and research from USDA recently showed that amygdalin actually helps honeybees combat certain viral diseases. And then the other thing the almond tree provides is very abundant nectar. Nectar is like the energy drink for honeybees. It's high in sugars. And those 2 things are sort of not only attract the honeybee to do the job for the almond tree, but really reward the honeybee with high quality nutrition. And we see that in an agricultural setting because research that we have funded shows that honeybee hives are stronger coming out of almonds. There are more bees, and they've laid a lot of brood for the next generation than they were going into almonds. In fact, many commercial beekeepers will actually have to split up their hives. They're getting too crowded, and they run the risk of swarming. So they'll actually split their hives and make 2 hives out of the one that came into almonds afterwards. So it's really a mutually beneficial relationship. The almond tree gets its cross-pollination, and the honeybee gets really abundant and high-quality nutrition.
That's great. So the almonds are good for the bees, just like they're good for us.
Yes.
So you work at the Almond Board of California, and in that role, you advance work to support almond production. Tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on that impact almond production and sustainability.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk briefly about a couple of them. One area that we're working on a lot right now is looking at the carbon footprint of almond production. We've funded, the Almond Board of California, by the way, is a grower-funded organization. So we are supported by all almond growers who provide the funds that supports our research and our global market development for almonds. And one area that we have been researching for quite a while now is that the different aspects of what contributes to the carbon footprint. So the way we grow almonds, and are there opportunities for us to improve that? So we have funded a couple of research projects that did a life cycle assessment of almonds. Those have been published in peer-reviewed journals by UC Davis, University of California, Davis, which is probably the leading almond research institution as a result of being here in this state. So we have a really good handle on where there are opportunities for us to reduce the carbon footprint by reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with the way we grow almonds, and then also opportunities to sequester carbon. The almond industry, through research, pioneered a technique called whole orchard recycling. And what that means is at the end of the life of an almond orchard usually is 20 to 25 years in lifespan before the trees start to decline. And so at that point, you take out the trees, push them over with big bulldozers. And using this technique, whole orchard recycling, you can take the entire tree across the entire orchard, which is many metric tons of wood, and chip that up, make wood chips, and then place those wood chips deep into the soil. And so through that process, research has shown that can sequester 5 tons of carbon per hectare, or about 2.5 tons of carbon per acre. And it's long-term storage. It's a really great way to take all the carbon that was sequestered in those trees, because it is like a forest, an agricultural forest. It is taking in carbon and translating that into the biomass that is the tree. And by this technique, we can take all that carbon and actually put it down into the soil and get long-term storage of that. So that is a technique that is taking off very rapidly, and we are doing more research to figure out what is the total carbon footprint of growing almonds, which right now looks like we're heading to a really great opportunity to have a net zero product, and maybe even provide negative carbon opportunities, or really carbon sequestration opportunities here in the state. Some people may know the state of California really values the environment, so we have climate goals, and the state government actually has very extensive processes to try to understand what is the total greenhouse gas footprint of our economy, which includes our working lands or our agricultural lands. And there is increasing recognition now at the state level that the perennial crops that we grow here, things like almonds, grapevines for the wine industry or the table grape industry, that those are actually good carbon sequestration opportunities. These are not things that are plowed up and replanted every year. So there's really a great opportunity for us to not only contribute to meeting our climate goals, but also get even farther in terms of our ability to sequester carbon through the way we grow almonds.
That's good to hear. Thanks. people hear a lot about water and almonds. Maybe tell us a little bit about that dynamic and
Yeah.
I mean, there's a drought in California and all plants need water. So tell us about how that works.
Yeah. So again, almonds evolved in a part of the world that is inherently dry. They come from the Middle East, sort of Central Asia region. So they're actually a drought-tolerant plant in the scheme of plants, certainly more drought-tolerant than a peach or a plum, which are very closely related. So they are uniquely suited to grow in Mediterranean climates. California actually grows 80% of the world's almonds. And the reason we do is that we have the largest Mediterranean climate in the world, and that is the Central Valley of California. So almond trees need cold winters to go into dormancy. So the tree needs to shut down. Your tree there does that really well in Washington, D.C., but as much as people think California is a warm place, in the Central Valley, we do get chilled, very cold winters. Well, cold winters, not very cold. Cold winters. We did get below freezing several nights out of the winter. And that's important for that tree to go dormant, to save its energy, to put that energy into the nut in the next year. And then at the same time, it needs a very hot, dry summer in order for those nuts to ripen. Almonds are actually harvested as we start harvesting in August, and that's the hottest time of the year there. The picture that the folks may have seen at the beginning of the almond itself, sort of fuzzy and green. That's actually the hull of the almond. It's sort of the outer coating, kind of analogous to the part of a peach that you enjoy eating. In almonds, they're not nearly as thick and fleshy, but they are pretty sweet. I've actually eaten them. And that hull has to actually split open in order for the nut to become visible. And that means the nuts are ripe and ready for harvest. It makes it really easy to take the hull off mechanically because it's split open. So you need a really hot, dry summer in order to dry out that hull and create the split. So that is why almonds do really well here in California and in all of the almond growing regions of the world, whether it's California, Spain, Portugal, Australia. These are the top almond growing regions of the world, and they're all dry and water limited as a result. So what we know here in California that we have a responsibility to using those resources as efficiently as possible. So the industry, through our research program, has funded research on a lot of different techniques that allow almond growers to be more efficient in using that water. A big step forward was in the last 20 years, the use of drip irrigation and very efficient micro sprinklers has helped us reduce the amount of water to grow a pound of almonds by 33% in the last 20 years. So that's a big step forward by just shifting our irrigation systems. And now we're looking at additional types of technology that can help you really sense what the tree's water needs are, so that you water based on the need of the tree, as opposed to, oh, it's Thursday, so let me turn on the sprinkler system. That's actually when my sprinklers go on once a week here in California. So that's another area that we're looking to make more improvement. And then also using biological systems. Whole orchard recycling is an incredibly powerful practice, because when you take that huge amount of wood and put it in the soil, you've actually really increased the water holding capacity of that soil. The wood is almost like little sponges that can hold the water in the soil profile. And research from the University of California, Davis showed that you can increase by 19% the irrigation water use efficiency in the orchard that you plant after whole orchard recycling, and increase the yield by 20%. So you're getting more crop per drop in a very significant way using practices like that. And we have similar research going on around things like cover crops, which can also add more organic matter into the soil and improve the water holding capacity of the soil. So those are ways we are seeking to make additional improvements. And the last thing I'll say is that, you and I have worked on agriculture around the world, and while it's very easy to think about dry areas having problems with water management. It's actually a global problem and a challenge for all of us to work on together, because even in parts of our Midwest, where you have irrigated agriculture at large scale, we are at risk of depleting aquifers, even faster than perhaps here in California. And we now have some really strong regulations that are coming into effect in California that will ensure that we have to sustainably manage not just the surface water, but also our groundwater. And I really believe those give us some strong guardrails to ensure that all of California agriculture, no matter how many changes we see over time, that we will have to be part of sustainable management of our natural resources, and give people confidence that when they eat an almond, they're eating something that was responsibly grown.
That's interesting. Water availability and irrigation is obviously tied to climate change. You hear about certain foods, coffee and others, that as the climate warms, they make it harder to grow. What will the impacts of climate change be on almond production, and what's the role of research in trying to address that?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the biggest impact will be on the water supply. Climate models for California show that we will have less reliable winter precipitation. So that precipitation, the most important form is in snow that occurs on our mountains, because that is where we can hold water in the form of snow for a longer period of time. And that snow, as it melts, also fills the reservoirs that feed the entire water supply for people and agriculture and the environment here in the state. So the impact is likely to be meaning less water in the future, but also sometimes more extremes. So more extreme drought, but also more extreme flooding. I think people might not realize where I'm standing here, which is near our state capital of Sacramento, is one of the most flood-prone, flood risk areas of the country, right after, I think, Louisiana. So after our last historic drought, that ended in 2016, we had extreme amounts of snowfall and flooding through one of our reservoirs here in the northern part of the state, and they actually had to evacuate some people because the water was spilling over the top of the reservoir. So it's those extremes on water that are a climate risk for agriculture. Interestingly, one technique that Almonds has again pioneered, working with researchers, is to take advantage of when we do have excess winter water through the form of rain and snow, and they manage our reservoirs to release water to ensure there's no flooding in the spring. How can we harness that water that's in the wintertime and spread it over agricultural land? So flood agricultural fields and recharge the groundwater, rather than just have it all flow out to the ocean when there's plenty of water in the rivers to begin with. So that groundwater recharge, where we bank our surplus winter rain, is another technique that we hope can help us more sustainably manage. The other change would just be the temperature, and extended periods of summer temperatures will have an impact on almonds. But again, almonds are adapted to a Mediterranean climate, and so there's no reason to believe that that the climate change is going to have a significant impact on the total production of almonds, other than availability of water.
Thank you. Just now, when you said that you could recharge the groundwater, I realized I don't know anything about almond tree roots. Are they able to access that groundwater during the growing season then, if those levels are replenished?
Not really. The almond roots are pretty shallow. I think they really draw water and nutrients within the top 1.5 feet of the soil profile. Where cover crops are really helpful is holding water in that top profile, for example. And we do cover crops only in the winter because they're rain fed. We don't actually have an irrigation system to help set them up, because we only water the trees. So it's really more about recharging deep into the aquifers, and that is a source of irrigation water as well as drinking water here in California. Most rural communities I mean, even the town I live in was historically, all of our water came from groundwater. We have very deep aquifers here compared to other parts of the US. And so making sure we're replenishing that is like banking it for the future.
Great, thanks. I see we've got some audience questions coming in. I'd like to take a couple. There's a couple questions here about almond varieties. And you mentioned at the very beginning that you have to plant several different almond varieties to get that cross-pollination. So maybe you could tell us a bit about almond varieties and particularly, I think from the consumer's point of view, or can we tell, or do they all just sort of taste the same to us?
Right. So there are probably about half a dozen to maybe 10 varieties that are grown commercially here in California. The almost half of about 40% of almond acreage is in a single variety called nonpareil. And if you know French, nonpareil is the best almond, and it's really the best almond for consumers because it's a fairly large size. It has a very good crunch and a nice flavor, but not a really strong flavor. Some people don't like the flavor of amaretto. And it's easy to roast and add flavor to those almonds. You might know smokehouse almonds are very popular, and now there's a lot of new flavors as well. And so that particular variety, which is well over 100 years old, and was actually just discovered on the landscape here in California. Many of our early varieties were just varieties that people found, sort of feral almond trees. Almonds came over with the Spanish missionaries to California. We had a type called Mission for a long time. And nonpareil was just, a wild sort of cross-pollination of trees that happened to exist from old farms or ranches, and birds deposited the kernels, and that variety was discovered, and we've been growing it for over 100 years. And it's still king of the hill for almonds. And if you buy a bag of just almonds, oftentimes that will be the variety that you see in there. If you buy mixed nuts, you might start to see different shapes and sizes of almonds because some of the other varieties get mixed together in what we call a California type. And that might have several different almond varieties within it. They don't vary that much in flavor. The market hasn't developed to want certain varietal flavors in almonds because a good portion of almonds are actually used as ingredients for plant-based milks and yogurts and cheeses now, as well as ingredients into confectionery products, bars, nutritional bars or snack bars. So many times almonds are blended in with other products. And so the variety taste isn't necessarily the number one thing that people are looking for, so long as it has a good crunch and sort of a mild but adaptable flavor mix. So you can't really go out and often find individual varieties of almonds in the grocery store.
You must have had a chance to taste some of them though. Do you have a favorite variety?
I do. The one I really like is called Fritz, and it's a smaller sized almond, which would be great for things like going into a Hershey's Kiss or a confectionery product where you need small almonds. But it actually has one of the higher levels of amygdalin, the amaretto flavor in almonds, and I happen to like that. So unfortunately, it's not a variety that is increasing in production, it's decreasing. So I have a small bag set aside in my pantry. Fortunately, almonds are very shelf stable, so I've had it for a couple of years and they're still good.
Nice. So as Grace mentioned at the beginning, we have an exhibit here at the garden right now, Cultivate, Growing Food in a Changing World. And in the exhibit, we talk about sort of the origins of foods and in today's modern world, how foods move around the world. And perhaps you could say a little bit about the origins of almonds and how they move around the world today.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the center of origin of the plant, almonds, is sort of the Middle East to Central Asia. In fact, almonds are very closely related to peaches and plums. And it was actually the rise of the Himalayas that separated the evolution of almonds from peaches. So peaches are actually can self-pollinate and almonds can't. And then culturally, that center of origin was brought over to places like Spain through the movement of Arab peoples into North Africa and into Spain. And then through Spain, the missionaries brought it to here to California. And as I mentioned, we do grow most of the world's almonds. And actually, the single #1 country that we export almonds to is India. India is the largest single almond market. And that also has to do with the movement of peoples. So the Persians moved throughout Central Asia and down into India, created sort of Mughal period of India, and brought with them the culture of eating almonds. And so in India, almonds are often given as a gift at holidays, like Diwali is a big almond present time. And so we have high exports in preparation for things like Diwali. And it's really that sort of, just as you said, movement of people around the world that created this cultural legacy. And then obviously new markets. We actually have a program for marketing in places like Mexico, and Brazil, where people haven't historically necessarily eaten almonds, but where people are discovering the nutritional benefits of almonds and the great taste and crunch.
Sorry, I was muted for all that.
Yes.
Sorry. Apologize.
That's all right. 2 years in, we all still have that problem.
One quick question on our way out. Just circling back to bees. Tell us a little bit about the relationship between beekeepers and almond growers.
Yeah, so every almond grower hires a beekeeper or bee broker every year to bring bees in to pollinate their crop. And many almond growers have been working with the same beekeeper for many, many years. I know a few almond growers for whom it's been passed down across generations. So their father had a relationship with the beekeeper's father. It is an essential part of growing almonds. And so they sign contracts with beekeepers in the fall, and those beekeepers are contracted to then bring hives to California or from within California to place them in almond orchards. And those bees stay in an almond orchard about 4 to 6 weeks out of the year. It's a time of the year when there's really no other, not very many flowers on the landscape. So a lot of beekeepers really like to come to almonds because, again, it provides really abundant natural food and their hives are stronger coming out. And one thing that we have done at the Almond Board, because we take pretty seriously this responsibility of keeping those bees safe when they're in the orchard. A grower pays on average over $400 per acre to have those honeybees there. So we want to make sure they protect that investment because those bees are going to come back next year and you want the beekeeper to be happy with their bees when they leave. So we have funded a lot of research on bee health and how practices in an almond orchard may impact bee health. We've worked with beekeepers, researchers, and government agencies to develop a set of best management practices. And those are something that we promote every year to make sure those honeybees truly leave an almond orchard stronger than they were coming in and will come back next year and pollinate the crop.
Right, that sounds like a metaphor for our year. Let's all try to leave it stronger than we started.
Indeed.
It's been really wonderful talking to you. Thank you for sharing such fascinating facts about almonds, and it's wonderful to learn about the research that is underway to help ensure that we can continue to eat almonds into the future and that they will be sustainable. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for this opportunity. When I lived in DC, this was one of my favorite places to visit. So I hope to come back and see your almond tree.
Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Josette Lewis and Dr. Saharah Moon Chapotin, for a wonderful discussion. Thank you to the Friends of the U.S. Botanic Garden for supporting this series, and thank you so much for everyone who attended today.